Hello.
Welcome back to another episode of Hold That Thought.
Welcome back.
How was your weekend?
You know just how my weekend was. We had the best time in Tahoe. We had some friends visiting for a ski trip, and the weather was honestly lovely, but not for a weekend in March. It was pretty depressing.
Very warm.
Very little snow.
We did a lot of cold plunges in the lake.
A lot of cold plunges.
My white whale was staying in the freezing cold lake for 30 seconds, and I did it.
That's amazing. I wasn't there for that. I was taking a nap.
I did it, and I was shocked at how quickly the cold seeps into your center core.
Really?
It makes you absolutely freezing.
Did you jump with anyone?
Yeah, our friend Nelia.
Okay, nice.
She did it with me.
Nelly.
We both did, and I was very proud of us. I was going to say, the whole controversy right now around are cold plunges good for women versus men and all that kind of gets into our episode today, I have to say. My sister was here for a little bit. It was really fun. She's one of those people that just makes everything better.
Yeah,
so shout out
really is.
to little Lizzie.
Hello, the doodle.
Little doodle.
I just love, I'm like, I have to get a doodle now because the way you say the word is so pleasing to me.
So we have a family dog, Stevie, who has popped up. She's had cameos in other episodes.
Yeah, she has. But I think you had to cut my doodle because it was so loud.
Oh, that was a spike on the audio.
That was a spike.
And we call her, since the very beginning, we've called her Stevie Goyle and
Stevie Come Touch.
Scumpy Doodle. Stevie Come Touch. You guys will never let that down. Basically, when we first got Stevie in COVID, we were reading up on training, and the modern day books were saying that come is a word that we too often use in our vernacular, so it can confuse dogs if you use that as a command.
Yeah.
So what's in nowadays is to say touch.
And I have heard it since, but it is just very funny.
I would tell my friends when they would take her, I was like, please start using the come touch. We're trying to teach her and train her. And I have never lived down Stevie Come Touch.
So cute.
A lot of me yelling after Scumpy Girl.
Wait, what's that one?
Scumpy Doodle.
Scumpy Dodo.
Everyone has their dog voice.
Yeah.
Do you have a cat voice for Molly?
I'm actually, that is so messed up. First of all, Macy died.
I'm so
Second of all,
sorry.
Lucy can't hear.
No voice necessary.
No, I don't talk.
I
signed to her.
But she's also
no, I do. I'm like, where's my Louie girl? It's honestly hard because I'm thinking of Stevie that I'm like,
yeah. And
my
again,
mom
she
says
can't hear
Louie
you.
girl.
You don't think at any
Yeah,
register.
and my dad, it's so funny because you can kind of be heard in any room of the house.
Yeah.
And so my dad, when he hears me or my mom talking to Lucy, he goes, she can't hear you.
He's like, shut up.
It's like, relax, Eric. You don't need to say that.
Let us talk to her.
Let us talk to her.
That's
I also
hilarious.
think she can feel the energy.
Totally.
So
she maybe hears
but
the
truly,
vibrations.
so she's facing you this way.
Yep.
And I'm here yelling, Lucy.
No
Can't hear
action.
anything.
So that means, though, she's blind, too.
She is deaf and blind, but I'm behind her. No. She's facing you.
Oh, she's
So, like,
facing
say
me.
the cap is her head. And this is the butt. And I'm like, Lucy.
Totally.
I would think that the vibrations would get to her, but they do not.
That's true deafness.
So sad.
But she seems to be living her life.
She's pretty happy. All right, well, we've talked about Lucy enough.
I like
And
to
she'll
call her
never hear
Molly.
any of this.
We have a really... So in our second episode of the miniseries In Plain Sight, we're discussing the biases against and lack of tailored research towards women in everyday life.
Yeah.
From medicine to cars to the way we've structured our office buildings and the way we go about our world has been built for men and not for women.
Yeah.
In ways that are obvious, but often so pervasive that we don't even know that they're there.
Right. And I think there have been multiple moments throughout our podcasts where I have listened back and thought, oh my God, you sound like such a man hater. But I love men.
Me too.
And feminism is not elevating women above men. It's trying to get us onto the same playing field and treating us with equity. And it is important to observe what in our society has not been built with us in mind, so that we can better achieve equity and equality.
Yeah, and I think this is a cool play on words of In Plain Sight because it's been shrouded for so long and just taken at face value that it is pernicious and hasn't been called out. And then now kind of peeling back one layer, it is all right there. It's just right under the surface, and you have to start calling it out to start devoting research and dollars to write it. So
absolutely. Well done. I want to share the epigraph from the book that kind of inspired this topic called Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Criado Perez. The epigraph of the book reads, representation of the world, like the world itself, is the work of men. They describe it from their own point of view, which they confuse with absolute truth. And that's a quote from Simone de Beauvoir. I think that quote pretty beautifully encapsulates what we want to talk about here. And the book, Invisible Women, is divided into 5 parts: daily life, the workplace, design, going to the doctor, and public life.
Ooh, cool.
And so I'm going to be pulling on some quotes from the book while we're talking, but going off what I said about not wanting to villainize men, one of her quotes helps support that idea. One of the most important things to say about the gender data gap is that it is not generally malicious or even deliberate. Quite the opposite. It is simply the product of a way of thinking that has been around for millennia and is therefore a kind of not thinking.
Yeah.
A double not thinking even. Men go without saying, and women don't get said at all. Because when we say human, on the whole, we mean man. So it's not even necessarily the case, for all the anecdotes we'll bring up, that it was a conscious effort to exclude women. But as the argument here kind of connotes, it's a lack of thinking. It's a lack of consideration. My mom used to say to me, if I did something, whatever, wasn't considerate or something, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to. And she'd go, try not to.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like,
so it's
attention.
not enough to not try to be excluding women. You have to be actively including them, as we will realize at the end of this.
Yep. And also it just was that men were the norm. And it's crazy because we're 51% of the population, but that has just been so baked in.
Men have been the default.
Yeah, thank you.
Where should we start?
So I've been interested in this for a while, starting when I was studying pre-med and thinking about how you really see that dearth of female tailored research and positioning in science textbooks. But more recently, something came up that kind of sparked this as a topic again for In Plain Sight, because an award-winning filmmaker and writer, Eve Van Dyke, produced a short documentary in partnership with the New York Times, and it just got posted this past weekend. It was all about the inequity of gendered research when it comes to car and automobile safety. She was inspired by this because in November 2024, she was on her way to a family dinner for Thanksgiving and got in a car accident. And she was really injured. Her mother-in-law was really injured. And their injuries were way more severe than those of the men in the car. She didn't really think anything of it until a friend said, well, that makes sense to me. Women are 73% more likely to be severely injured in vehicle crashes than men.
She had the stat on hand.
He'd like heard it somewhere in a podcast and was like, yeah, that makes sense to me. This is the case. And women are 17% more likely to die in a car crash than a man.
Wow.
And Eve was like, what? This is crazy. And so she dove down a rabbit hole and produced a short that describes what this experience was of being spurred on to do this research of why that is the case after going through her own harrowing, life-threatening accident. So essentially, and exactly what you said from Invisible Women, cars have been designed by men for men. Back in the early days of automobile design, safety wasn't even a concept, right? Like no one was considering what would happen if you got in a crash. No one was considering seatbelts, etc. And actually, the automobile industry really tried hard to not think about safety for a long, long time. Wow. But it wasn't until the 1970s, in response to criticism that automobile makers were not taking safety features seriously and they were blaming the drivers, that the U.S. created the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Okay. And this administration started making dummies for testing safety features of cars. Those dummies, the standard dummy was 5'9" and 170 pounds.
My perfect replica.
Exactly. It wasn't until the 2000s that they added a female dummy that was 4'11" and 108 pounds, and in its shape and makeup was essentially that of a 12-year-old boy, not at all of an adult woman.
Oh my God.
The shape and makeup of these dummies has not been representative of women. Yeah. The proportions of our body, the shape of our pelvic bone, all these things that when you're getting in an accident actually really make a difference. Women on average have less muscle mass in their neck and upper torso, which makes them way more susceptible to upper body injuries right now in the way that the seats and the airbags are designed. Okay. Plus, again, like I said, the difference in the size and shape of our pelvis makes us more susceptible to lower body injuries in a car. Okay. And this is only just now starting to be a topic of, oh, wait, we need to actually create a female crash dummy that is representative of women and force automobile makers to use them in testing.
So what would does she talk in the documentary about what that would change about the design of a car to accommodate for that pelvic?
She doesn't get into that, and I don't think that has actually been outright said. Yeah. There is this company called Humanetics that has started creating what they're calling the female crash dummy of the modern age. They've named her Thor 5F.
At least it's not like Sarah.
I know. She went as part of her research to NISTA, is what you call the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. situation. She went into their like workshop to see what their 4'11", 109 pounds
get a real
woman
good look
dummy
at her.
looked like. And she saw one in the corner with like hair and makeup on. Just like so, it's left over from such a bygone era.
Yeah.
So Humanetics, like I said, is the company that's been developing this more up-to-date advanced dummy. And Automobile and NISTA are dragging their feet. The government says it takes too many resources to force the automobile companies to use Thor 5F. But in the meantime, they're creating a more advanced male dummy. So just perpetuating the problem.
Classic.
There is a bipartisan act called the She Drives Act, which would have NISTA force automobile companies to use an updated female dummy.
Okay.
So that's hopefully in our future, but it's something that we should all be looking out for. And I've never gotten into a car and thought about this.
Right.
And Eve, now that she's had this experience and gone down her rabbit hole, says now when I'm in a car, it's just a reminder that it wasn't built for me. So this thing that was once invisible is now in plain sight for her, of how the fact that like this element of our every single day was not designed for women.
God, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
And also it's harrowing to think about her getting into a car that she knows wouldn't protect her well in a crash.
I know.
Because it sounds like right now there isn't any alternative. It's not like you can add a booster seat, help it be more ergonomic for a woman's body, unless there is that, and we just haven't caught it in our research. But
I'm gonna look. What can women do? What can women do that men can't, is what comes out.
What is everything? The Jeopardy piece there just reminded me of this Michael Scott quote that I love that used to be, when pages you would like on Facebook would be full quotes.
Yeah.
It was just like a movie quote.
Yeah.
So this was a Michael Scott quote that I liked on Facebook. He's talking to...
I've only seen like
Toby.
Maybe 3 or 5 or maybe up to 10 episodes of The Office.
God, it's so crazy. Okay. So Michael, the manager...
I know who Michael is.
Is talking to Toby, who's the head of HR. And Michael has just hit Meredith with his car.
Okay. Yep.
In front of the office. And so Toby's asking him for all the details. Michael goes, well, I hit her on company property with company property. So double jeopardy. We're fine. And Toby goes, Michael, I don't think you get how jeopardy works. And he goes, sorry. What is we're fine?
So good.
So I was doing a little callback there.
And car related.
Crazy. I know.
So what they're saying now is that because cars and the safety features of cars have not been designed for women, really what we'd have to do is take the seat position into our control.
Right.
So your hips have to be as high as your knees. Seat base and back has to be at 100 to 110 degree angle. I'm like, excuse me, who's bringing their protractor out there? It's a lot of like minute changes that they're arguing is significant for keeping you safe in a car that is not designed for women.
Right. I think as we will find with all of what we're about to share, our biggest enemy is going to be the status quo and inertia, because people already have proven that, this is just too much. This is how our world is. It will remain this way.
It costs resources, new ways of thinking, considering, and at the same time, it is very exciting to see how it's being tackled.
Right.
Across all these different areas.
Yeah. And I think ultimately the first layer of this is to reveal what is in plain sight.
Love it.
And how can we address an issue that we don't know anything about?
Love it. So true.
So this is one step towards a brighter future. One small step for women, one large step for womankind.
Okay, talk to me about how our days have not been set up for women.
Right. Okay.
I'm so excited to hear about this.
Well, I honestly was unaware of this until a couple of years ago when I came across the work of this woman named Alyssa Vitti, who created the cycle syncing method. A lot of people on social media now have heard about this, probably specifically women. Alyssa is a nutritionist and hormone expert whose research focuses on the female infradian rhythm and the distinct patterns and needs that each phase of the cycle has from a metabolic, stress, immunologic, energy, and cognitive perspective. So basically, men follow a circadian rhythm, which is 24 hours, which is what our days, our modern days are built upon.
Yeah.
Typically, testosterone peaks in the early morning around 7 to 10 a.m. and then it reaches its lowest point in the late afternoon or evening. And the cycle is largely driven by sleep, with the highest levels occurring after a night of deep sleep.
Whoa. So is testosterone related to energy? Like technically, your energy levels are following the way our days are set up, of like you are active during the day and quiet at night, is following men's hormones levels.
Yes. And it's driven by cues of lightness and darkness.
Okay.
So visual.
Yep.
I feel like Dr. Huberman talks about this all the time, how you need to start your circadian clock each morning by exposing your eyes to direct sunlight. Not direct sunlight, but like you need
stare at the sun for 5 minutes every morning.
My ritual revealed. It's recommended by him and other experts that in order to start your clock of the day,
which is a 24-hour clock,
that you have exposure to sunlight, because that starts our daytime clock, which then will signal later in the day that it's time for bed, etc. It's all a pretty well-honed system in our bodies. Now, people who menstruate experience also an infradian rhythm, which men do not experience in the same way. It's far less pronounced.
And just to go to the definition of infradian, because circadian, dian means day. So circadian is like within a day, and infra means beyond. So it's essentially a cycle that lasts longer than the 24 hours, occurring less frequently than once daily.
We see infradian rhythms. This is from the Cleveland Clinic. We see infradian rhythms in nature all the time, from hibernation and migration patterns to the molting or shedding of skin and mating behaviors. These infradian rhythms contain various phases and often repeat themselves over longer periods. We, as women, have 4 distinct phases: menstrual, follicular, ovulatory, and luteal. And men do not have that same roughly 28 day cycle.
Yeah.
Our world is basically built around the model of a circadian rhythm and around men. When we, people who menstruate, are put into a 24-hour workday that was built around the peaks and valleys of men's testosterone levels, we are really set up for a lack of success and failure, because we don't have those same peaks in energy. Our energy is dependent on the time of the month for us that we are in our cycle. But obviously, then the argument comes in that if every person who menstruates is on a different cycle, it's not like we're all menstruating in the first 4 days of the month.
Right.
It is ultimately hard to accommodate for.
Yep.
I'll hand it to him.
Yep. So that ties to a episode I was listening to with Dr. Kristen Holmes, who's the principal scientist at Whoop. The industry of wearables has really opened up the ability to do research on women or people that menstruate and infradian rhythms in a way that has never really been able to be done before, because you're literally tracking someone at every moment. Yeah. And they're everything from their energy levels to their sleep based on their hormone fluctuation.
Wow.
And she was talking about how Whoop has done a lot of research recently in partnership with a few different institutions around how your training or exercise, aligning it based on your menstrual cycle and where you are in your rhythm, can actually get you way better and different results. And they've been starting to develop personalized training programs for people.
Alyssa's been doing this for years, but yeah.
Well, I'm sure. To your point of like, how do we operationalize this if women aren't on the same cycle? You think of women's sports teams. If you have women who are all in separate cycle, how are you supposed to institute like optimized training regimens for all of them? You need them all to like play in the game, but maybe half are on their follicular and half are on their...
The U.S. women's national soccer team, the coach, Don Scott, actually implemented the framework to support players' training.
What? That's so cool.
And it gave the team a competitive advantage. So I didn't look too far into this, but somehow they were able to tailor it given the research that they found about infradian rhythms and endocrine system shifts, and
no way
accommodated for those differences and fluctuations.
That's so cool. I just know. Like, that's awesome. And it gave them a competitive edge.
Yeah, I think something I have found through reading Alyssa Vidi's work is that different vitamins, minerals, components of certain food like fiber, etc., are beneficial in different amounts at different points in your cycle. And she actually has this app that I loved back when I was really trying to support my PCOS. Where, you know, I would select, okay, I'm in my menstrual phase, and it would give me a shopping list basically of like, here are the vegetables that are rich in iron for this period of time. And she has like recipes and all this stuff and recommendations for workouts and everything. And I think obviously, as we're talking about Whoop and we're talking about this app, capitalism is unfortunately like capitalism created this issue, and then we are forced to use capitalism to resolve it. But I think information has become so democratized that actually a lot of this is accessible for free. Yeah. Phoebe Fry, who does the music for our podcast, She and I co-authored a Substack that is all about cycle syncing. So if you want to look, it's there and it's free.
We'll link in the show notes.
Yeah.
A family friend of mine has talked about how she has experienced such bad symptoms of PMS and certain days out of her month every month are so hard that she's had to single-handedly figure out how to make her work schedule work for her. Yeah. So luckily she was in a position to make sure every month in that time of PMS, she would strive to schedule no important meetings. Yeah. Because she knew that it would be too hard. That is so out of our norm of being able to have that level of control. But the reality for a ton of women that like they're so impacted certain days of the month by their infradian rhythm, by the changes in their hormones. Yeah. But our daily life is not set out to accommodate those changes.
When I was tracking really diligently, I made sure not to make big decisions in my luteal phase because I knew, especially for myself, this isn't necessarily for all women or people who menstruate, but I was always more irritable, more sensitive during that phase. I mean, you see people on TikTok all the time talk about like how they feel about their appearance during their luteal phase versus menstruation, whatever. There really are these market fluctuations for a lot of us. And as I'm saying all this, I'm like, you can hear some conservative in the background being like, and this is why you can't be president. I love to make that joke with our friends and stuff, but I'm like, I hate that revealing this and corroborating the fact that like PMS is real somehow lends credibility to that argument that women are unpredictable and like can't be trusted with authority. But that doesn't mean just because it opens us up to criticism in that way doesn't mean that we don't address that which will make our lives much easier, which is accommodating our cycles insofar as possible.
Yeah. And I would also just say there are women leaders around the world and wars have never been started by women. So
I know that's right.
That I feel like is the counter argument. Yeah. It's crazy to think about what a world would look like if we had built our calendar, our day around both the male rhythm and the female rhythm. I can't even wrap both my head around that.
I can't either.
But you had done some research on what an early calendar could have been?
Well, great transition there, darling.
Thank you.
I found this really interesting Substack article by Olivia Campbell. She wrote a piece called How Period Tracking Birthed the Calendar. And I found this so intriguing.
Ooh, I'm excited.
So basically, she quotes this author, William Irving Thompson, who wrote The Time Falling Bodies Take to Light, Mythology, Sexuality, and the Origins of Culture. He said, women were the first observers of the periodicity upon which all later scientific observations were made. It is believed by some historians that the concept of timekeeping, or even possibly early mathematics, may have originated from women tracking menstrual cycles in relation to the moon.
Ooh.
Part of the reason for this belief is that what is viewed as one of the first calendars was this thing called the Ishango bone. And it was discovered in the late 1950s near Lake Edward, which is on the border of modern-day Uganda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Okay.
It's a roughly 20,000 to 25,000-year-old baboon fibula that bears carved grouped notches. The hypothesis was popularized in the 1990s by ethnomathematician Claudia Zaslavsky.
Ethnomathematician is a word I've never heard.
I have not either. In fact, it comes up red on Google Docs. I don't know. They don't know it either. The theory posits that the 168 marks on the bone, so that fibula I talked about that was discovered, divided into columns totaling 60, 48, and 60, represent a 6-month lunar calendar. Since the menstrual cycle, averaging 28 to 29 days, closely aligns with the lunar month, proponents argue that women, as primary observers of nature's periodicities, so like periodic cycles, would have had the most direct need to track these cycles. There are some critics who are like, that's just some bored caveman scribbling. But they are such marked, they're equidistant from each other. It's pretty compelling. And some have argued that it would have been used by men or women to track women's cycles as they were ovulating. So, you know, at the time they didn't have this language, but to track when they would be fertile to be able to reproduce. I found another great quote from Barbara G. Walker, who's a feminist author. She wrote, "The Women's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets." It has been shown that calendar consciousness developed first in women because of their natural menstrual body calendar, correlated with observations of the moon's phases. Chinese women established a lunar calendar 3,000 years ago, dividing the celestial sphere into 28 stellar mansions, through which the moon passed. Among the Maya of Central America, every woman knew the great Maya calendar had first been based on her menstrual cycles.
Ooh. Let me just say that the root of the word calendar comes from the Latin word calendarium, which is a count book or register, which was the day debts were due on the first day of the month, which was upon observing the new moon. Just to say, like, how crazy would it be if we were not built on a solar calendar, but a lunar calendar?
Yeah.
What would be different? True. Would our months be more facilitated around, like, a woman's different phases of her cycle?
Yeah.
Or maybe it would just, the conversation would be more obvious. Like, it would be more sanctioned to have this be in our vernacular.
It also feels like at times it's such a delicate balance between acknowledging that there are quote unquote deficits for us at certain times of the month and then not allowing that to become a slippery slope for an argument that we are incapable.
Well, I feel like the word deficit there is different. Like, it's only a deficit that we're using because it's compared to a man's stability versus just saying like,
no, I experience deficits. I have a deficit in my positive mood.
That's true.
I have a deficit in my energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think there's a way of framing it that wouldn't be like a
lowered.
Yeah, status.
But this is what I'm saying, kind of like it's okay to acknowledge that we are not as apt to do certain things at different times of the month. It's also worth noting that office temperature, I learned this in Invisible Women as well, that office temperature in like corporate offices is also dictated by the male body. So here's a quote. The formula to determine standard office temperature was developed in the 1960s around the metabolic resting rate of the average 40-year-old 70-kilogram man. But a recent study found, and this was at the time of publishing, which was 2021, found that the metabolic rate of young adult females performing light office work is significantly lower than the standard values for men doing the same type of activity. In fact, the formula may overestimate female metabolic rate by as much as 35%, meaning that current offices are on average 5 degrees too cold for women.
Whoa.
Which leads to the odd sight of female office workers wrapped up in blankets in the New York summer while their male colleagues wander around in summer clothes.
All this is really danced around the fact that there are fundamental metabolic and cellular differences between cellular differences between men and women, males and females, that has not been studied or accounted for in medicine, in clinical research, and there's huge impacts of that.
Okay, as we talk about this, I want to bring up that, and I was actually talking to Liza, your sister, about this weekend, that often I feel that we are disincentivized from talking about the differences anatomically, biologically between men and women because we understandably want to support the inclusion and existence of non-binary and transgender people. And so I feel like, you know, people might bristle against what we're sharing for that reason. And there are fundamental differences between bodies, and there are ways in which certain bodies are similar, and there are ways in which another group of bodies are similar, and then there are ways in which we overlap, and there are ways in which, you know, like all of it is so nuanced. And we do need to acknowledge, as a woman, I'm interested in learning about how my body functions differently from a man, and I hope it is understood that I still desire to protect our trans and non-binary neighbors.
I love that. And I also would say that there's been a huge dearth of research devoted to biological sex impacts and gender. And that is another area that we need to be doing research on. I also think that we're afraid to talk about this in this zone because we don't want to talk about the differences when it comes to other spheres like the legal, the education, all of this. Like we're just talking biological, like
everything is political.
Right.
So us talking about this doesn't exist in a vacuum. So it's like all in this messy middle.
Totally. And when we're talking about the differences, this does not extend out into how we should be treated differently when it comes to other spheres. If we recenter on medicine and clinical research, male biology is still taught as the default, and learning about female biology is considered kind of the special interest, or how organ systems, hormones, cellular differences differ between males and females is considered special interest, which is
bonus
hilarious.
Content. It's like behind a paywall.
Literally.
Patreon.
It's just like really not how science has been taught. And it's therefore not how research has been done across the clinical sector. There are a few reasons for that. I'll start with saying, one, that females' bodies have been considered too complicated, which is just general sexism. And I want to remind us to the top of the episode, like, this hasn't been maliciously done necessarily, but there are serious consequences to it. And it has just been a grave assumption that it's all going to be fine because we're similar. It has been a white male dominated field, privileging white male bodies and privileging the outcomes of those bodies and just assuming that all the rest will be okay. Considering the lack of female representation in clinical research, it's because researchers were worried that hormone fluctuations would impact the results. They just wanted the men's stable hormones, treat them at the norm, base all of our medical investigations, development of medical interventions around male bodies, and ignore the complexity of female hormones.
No variability. And that's not just with humans. Research done on mice and rodents. They often just choose no lady mice.
Just choose male rats because it's easier. It's because like they don't have to worry about infighting.
Oh my god,
it's crazy. I love this quote from Dr. Kate Wormersley, who is a researcher in the UK who focuses on gender and sex equity. Her quote in response to the fact that historically women's bodies have been deemed too complicated is, "That is the noise of real life." Yes, that adds extra noise. That is the noise of 51% of the population. So how is it that we've just deemed it too loud to think about? All of this is to say that women have been underrepresented in clinical research. This also got worse in the 1970s, right in the boom of when biomedical research was just starting to kick off post-World War II. There was starting to be some progress, but in the 1960s, there were 3 main backlashes on drugs relating to reproductive health that essentially caused the FDA to choose to exclude women of reproductive age from all clinical trials.
Wow.
So there was a drug developed in the 1960s called thalidomide, which thousands of pregnant European and Australian women took for morning sickness, and they thought it was deemed safe, and it was actually found to cause severe birth defects and sometimes even death in the babies. This was the first time science, modern medicine, realized that the placenta around the baby wasn't actually a fully bulletproof protection and that things could cross through the placenta, which is just mind-boggling to me that the research hadn't even been done to see if that was the case. I think it just speaks to the foundation or the lack thereof that all of our modern clinical research has been built upon. There's just a dearth of understanding. The second instance back in the 1970s that kind of caused this backlash was a drug called the DES, which was given to prevent miscarriage, but it too crossed placenta and caused cancer in some of the babies. And then kind of the third straw that broke the camel's back was this IUD called the Dalkin Shield, which actually caused infertility, infection, and sometimes death.
God, it was so awful.
It's awful. And it was this trifecta in the short period of time of 3 of these drugs or medical interventions that caused this massive backlash and horrible results and forced the FDA in 1977 to exclude all women of reproductive potential from phase 1 and 2 clinical trials. So that's not even saying women who are pregnant. That is all women of reproductive potential. This started to change a little bit in the 1980s when one congresswoman named Congresswoman Schroeder was one of only 14 women in Congress at the time, learned that this aspirin study had only been conducted on men, was outraged, dug deep into the NIH and realized that the NIH technically had a guideline that women were supposed to be included in research, but it was just not being implemented, which then caused the 1993 NIH S1 Revitalization Act, which was a bipartisan bill that required women and minorities be included in clinical trials. So this kind of set the standard for researchers to be required to include women to receive the research funding from the NIH or clearly explain why they weren't. And this was the first step, but this did not fix everything. This entrenched bias has persisted. The foundation was set too early. And what they've come to see is that implementation has really fell short in the real world. It hasn't gone into medical school curriculums, doctors' offices, really drug developments, while research itself might have an equal or close to equal number of male and female participants. The results themselves aren't being segmented out by biological sex.
Can you explain that further?
What it is like there might be including women in research studies, but only 5% of research is being reported in a way that segments by sex. So they're not splitting out this.
So they're saying 90% of participants, blah, 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 blah. They don't say male participants,
exactly.
female. Okay.
They're not publishing the data broken down by group, meaning the results can't be understood by group.
So what's the freaking point?
Exactly. It's crazy.
Well, what is the point, though? Is it really just to check a box that they did what was mandated?
I think so. I mean, the question is this on the researchers, or is it the medical journals that are choosing to publish certain research that aren't requiring this? It's one of those things, to your point, like the status quo. We haven't implemented this need. It takes more time. It takes more resources to bifurcate the data this way. And it's just still not the status quo.
Wow.
Failing to study medications and other interventions in a broad sampling of women has caused real adverse effects. In terms of medications, we can start there. Women experience adverse effects from medications at twice the rate of men. There's this crazy story I learned about the launch of Ambien for sleep.
Okay.
It was studied only on men. Okay. It was deemed safe for everyone.
Perfect.
Ambien is metabolized very differently in women.
Yeah.
So the recommended dose that was published for all is basically an overdose when you give it to a woman. If you overdose on Ambien, the result is essentially these intense sleep episodes, essentially sleepwalking on steroids, where people were trashing their house and waking up in the morning and thinking they'd been robbed, cooking gourmet meals while asleep, driving in their car.
Wait, where'd you get gourmet from?
Cooking meals.
Yeah.
Okay. Cooking
gourmet
meals.
is cracking me up. Suddenly became a Michelin star chef.
You could become anyone you wanted on your Ambien trip. And it's all because they hadn't thought to think, is this dose the right dose for women?
Yeah.
I want to credit cardiologists in particular who kind of changed the paradigm around this. Dr. Paula Johnson is a cardiologist by training and now is the president of Wellesley College. She founded and served as the executive director of the Connors Center for Women's Health and Gender Biology at Brigham and Women's from 2002 to 2016. She focused majority of her research on the disproportionate health outcomes of women when it came to cardiac health and heart attacks.
Because the symptoms are different, right? I was seeing some of that.
Exactly. So basically, since the dawn of time, which I know you love, when it comes to training, heart disease and heart attacks have been taught with a very specific stock photo of both the symptoms and the type of person who's experiencing it.
Okay.
It's an old white male and he's clutching his chest and he is coming in with chest pain.
Okay.
So still to this day, that is often how the symptoms of heart attack are taught.
Okay.
Females experience very different symptoms. Shortness of breath. So they come into the ED, say I have shortness of breath, and they're often told to get a chest x-ray or that they're having anxiety. Indigestion and nausea, they're often sent home with Tums. Because they're not presenting as what is still taught to this day as the standard symptoms, it takes doctors and healthcare professionals a lot longer to uncover that a heart attack is occurring. And so the results are a lot worse. There's a story of this woman who came in and she just had a baby and she was experiencing shortness of breath. And the doctor said, you're having anxiety. You're having a hard time. You just had a baby. She came back 2 days later, still experiencing the same symptoms. And at that point, her heart was in such failure, she had to get a heart transplant. All because her symptoms of shortness of breath were not considered the textbook and were dismissed.
Wow.
Paula Johnson, her talk went kind of viral in early 2014 around what had been happening and this kind of gender gap in health. And Elizabeth Warren happened to be in the room.
Love Liz. I worked on her campaign.
I know, shout out. She became absolutely obsessed with this topic. Her mother, I didn't know this story, had been in a hospital for a surgery, had thought was going home, the surgery had gone well, and then had been experiencing kind of what she thought and the doctors had thought was indigestion or gas pain. And she died the day before she was supposed to be discharged because she was having a heart attack. And it was never treated because it was not diagnosed as a heart attack. No one knew that women had heart attacks too because it just wasn't taught.
Yeah.
Paula Johnson says in an interview that Elizabeth Warren came up to her and said, we are going to work on this together. And back in 2015, that House and Senate Democrats actually asked for a government accounting office report on how many women in clinical trials are actually being supported by the NIH. So there have been continuous efforts to make sure we're thinking through the differences, but it's just really interesting. interesting.
Really interesting. And thank God there are the Warrens of the world.
Yeah. I think this just...
And the Johnsons of the world.
And the Johnsons. This just dovetails into like the general dismissal of women's symptoms and people saying like it's all in your head. Like,
well, you know, I have a friend who had chest pain for many months, went to multiple doctors telling them of this chest pain, saying it was abnormal in their body, and they said that was anxiety. And eventually their partner was like, no, we need to really investigate this. It is not normal. There's something wrong for this to have persisted for so long. And it was cancer.
oh, wow. Yeah.
And if that person in their life had not encouraged them to continue advocating for themselves, which they had already done, then this would have gone diagnosed and they could have died. We were talking about this weekend. Unfortunately, the ability to advocate for yourself is incredibly valuable because the world, as we have learned, for women especially, was not built for us.
Yeah.
And so trusting our intuition, that's something that in the past few years I've been hearing a lot of.
Yeah.
And it's definitely been commodified. But at the root of it, it is so helpful for all of us it's helpful for us to hone our interoception, like our awareness of what is occurring inside of our bodies for just this reason.
Yeah. And just how helpful for us just to even now for ourselves and the other women we love in our lives to say, these are the common symptoms of heart attacks.
Yeah.
You might not know of them.
Same with breast cancer. We Can Do Hard Things did a whole episode, I think a series of episodes, because Amanda was diagnosed with breast cancer and she has dense breasts.
Yeah.
I would never have identified my breasts as dense necessarily, but there's a whole different series and frequency, like cadence of checkups that you have with different kinds of tests that are done if you are someone with dense breasts. And again, it's just not really taught in a lot of schools. You need to find a practitioner who is aware of the differences.
Yeah. I think the all in your head thing is so often exacerbated because areas of women's health haven't been prioritized. So there isn't the data to back it up that it's not in your head.
Right.
And it's just this vicious cycle. Like menopause, for example, is so significantly under-researched. 99% of aging research neglect menopause as a key factor of aging, which is insane.
Not to mention perimenopause.
Yeah, not to mention perimenopause. And this lack of data means that 91% of women in a study, according to the PMC, feel that they lack sufficient information and leaves 60% of them with severe symptoms untreated. I think we're seeing a paradigm shift around this a little bit more. I feel like it's the area of women's health and maybe health more in general that's getting a lot of attention and research and devotion. But that just goes to show like this is a vicious cycle. If you don't know how to talk about it or recognize it and there isn't the research to substantiate it, you will not get the support you need.
Right. And social media definitely has its downfalls, but one bonus is that you're able to get the word out about these things to a much greater scale.
Yeah,
so
true. So we've gotten to the point today where women account for roughly 40% of participants in clinical trials for 3 diseases that affect women most often: cancer, cardiovascular disease, and psychiatric disorders. Yes, we represent 51% of the U.S. population and only 41% of clinical trial participants. I think some of that is also women are often less likely to raise their hand to participate. I feel like that's conditioned. Like there's an element of fear that comes into all of this. Like if you haven't been represented, why would I now want to go be the guinea pig?
Yeah.
But we're starting to break free of that limitation. And then also I think there is this fear, pregnant people are commonly excluded from trials. There is this fear around safety of trials and research, but it's getting better.
I have one final bit to share that I think is interesting in light of what we talked about with the beginning, all of this happening in plain sight, right under our noses. In Invisible Women, the book that I was referring to before, the author talks about how something even as mundane as snow removal encodes assumptions about whose movement in the world matters.
Ooh, cool.
That's gendered. I'll read a bit from this because I think she talks about it well. In 2011, officials in the town of Karlskoga in Sweden were hit with a gender equity initiative. So they needed to reevaluate all policies that they had in the city through a gendered lens.
Who enforced that?
It was kind of vaguely referred to, reevaluate all their policies. As one after another of their policies were subjected to this harsh glare, one unfortunate official laughed that at least snow clearing was something the gender people, quote unquote, would keep their noses out of. Unfortunately for him, his comment got the gender people thinking, is snow clearing sexist? So the author talks about how we lack consistent sex disaggregated data from every country, but the data we do have makes it clear that women are invariably more likely than men to walk and take public transport.
Women are more likely to walk and take public transport than men?
Yes, invariably. Regardless of the country, women are more likely than men to walk and take public transport. So men are more often driving. They found that snow clearers, their schedules, prioritized first the main roads and like arteries of the city.
For drivers,
which were more often men, and the smaller paths for biking, public transport, walking, which were disproportionately used by women, were prioritized second. So what all these differences meant back in Karlskoga was that the apparently gender-neutral snow clearing schedule was in fact not gender-neutral at all. So the town councilors switched the order of snow clearing to prioritize pedestrians and public transport users. After all, they reasoned, it wouldn't cost any more money, and driving a car through 3 inches of snow is easier than pushing a buggy or a wheelchair or a bike through 3 inches of snow. What they didn't realize was that it would actually end up saving them money. Since 1985, northern Sweden had been collecting data on hospital admissions for injuries. Their databases were dominated by pedestrians, who are injured 3 times more often than motorists in slippery or icy conditions, and account for half the hospital time of all traffic-related injuries. And the majority of these pedestrians are women. A 5-year study in Skane County uncovered the same trends and found that the injuries cost money in healthcare and lost productivity. The estimated cost of all these pedestrian falls during just a single winter season was 36 million kroner, or around 3.2 million pounds. This is likely to be a conservative estimate, but even with this conservative estimate, the cost of pedestrian accidents in icy conditions was about twice the cost of winter road maintenance.
Wow.
In Solna, near Stockholm, it was 3 times the cost, and some studies reveal it's even higher. Whatever the exact disparity, it is clear that preventing injuries by prioritizing pedestrians in the snow clearing schedule makes economic sense. And because pedestrians are statistically more likely to be women, it's just another example of how our systems, our lives, are not set up to prioritize the needs of women.
Interesting. I'd like to understand why women are more often. I'm almost like it's because they're...
Well, part of it was that
jobs are farther away, like they have the greater economic freedom to do XYZ.
It's partly because women make multi-stop trips, whereas men statistically are more likely to have linear commutes. So like they go from home to work to home, whereas women are more likely statistically to be going to school, to be going to visit their ailing parent, to get groceries, caregiving. Men's travel patterns tend to be linear, home to work and back again, while women's are more complex, involving multiple stops related to caregiving and unpaid labor. When transport systems are designed around the former, they systematically fail the latter.
Interesting. So cool.
So women then incur more injuries, worse access, and higher healthcare bills.
Wow.
Lucky us.
In plain sight on the sidewalk.
In plain fucking sight.
Oh, interesting. Well, I learned a lot through this, and I just think I'm going to look at things a little bit differently. And not in a way that's scary or feel like angry, but knowledge is power, so good to know.
Knowledge is totally power.
I don't think I have a game for you today.
Okay, that's fine.
But I'll think of one for next week.
Perfect. Love you.
Love you.
Zah!
Thank you, Phoebe Fry, for this episode's music.
And thank you, Emily Kiernan, for the beautiful cover art.
If you like this episode, please like, share, and leave a comment. And we'll see you next week.